Today we begin our last of the 3 hand fans, and we are doing a Clover design on this last one. This is one of 3 fans I picked up from Daiso in Osaka. And it seems to have a mulberry paper, or at least paper with maybe mulberry fibers in it. You can kind of see the fibers, which makes it a fun challenge to draw and paint on. So I'm gonna begin by sketching on it with these colored leads. I've got a blue and I've got a green. And these are Color Eno color leads, and you guys can find links to these in the descriptions below. And my other 2 designs have kind of high up designs, so I'm gonna focus on something that kind of encircles the base of the fan. Oh, gotta be really careful around the edges because it wants to, that's where it really wants to like poke through or lift up. And I'm gonna do my sketching in time lapse, and I'll see you guys once this has been sketched. So we've got our design sketched out. The first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start with the clover blossoms. And for that, I want a little bit of olive green, a little bit of yellow, and a little bit of ultramarine blue. Start by filling one of our wells with clean water. So the first thing I'm gonna do, and I apologize that you can't see the clovers very clearly, is I'm gonna go in and get the centers with a really light wash of yellow. And then dip yellow and olive green in, wet into wet, so it'll kind of softly diffuse. And that's just sort of for the heart of the clover blossoms. And I'm not really attempting for every blossom to have the same look. I'm not really going for identical flowers. And while that dries, I'm going to mix up a bit of a wash. We'll see how well this works. And in that wash, I'm going to use the 2 darker greens. And I'm just going to use that to kind of fill in some of the areas with the clover. And I'm sort of avoiding the clover themselves because I want to start with a lighter color with those. And this is going to dry to a really, really light shade of green. So I may opt to go back and darken some areas. But for now, I'm just going to keep it kind of simple. All right, and I'll let that dry. So that first layer has dried. I'm actually going to mix it a little bit deeper. And then I'm just going to use it at the bottom, kind of where a green like this would be most saturated. And then I'll let that dry and we can work on the clovers and the clover blossoms. So the next step is to go ahead and start filling in the clover blossoms. And clover blossoms come in like 3 different colors, well 4 really. White, kind of a hot pink, a red, and a purple. We're doing the white ones, not really for any particular reason. I'm sure the hot pink, red, and purple ones would have looked really pretty like this. And I love those as well. When I was a girl, my grandparents' place in Picayune had red clover, and I used to love running through it. But that, to me, is more late summer, or it feels more late summer. It might have been early spring for all I can remember. But the little white clover that start peeking up in Louisiana, they start coming up in like February. So for me, they're a very early spring sort of thing. And here in Tennessee, the first flowers that I notice are daffodils. And then the little violets start poking their heads out. And then there's clover too that have like little yellow flowers. And that's what we get more up here, but I like the white ones better than the tiny yellow flowers. So I'm not going to great pains to avoid the yellow-green centers, but I'm also not fully covering them either. All right, I'm gonna let these dry. And since none are really adjacent to any of the green clover, all right, I'll go ahead and get started then with those. So I'm taking kind of a nice bright shamrock green, mixing it with a little bit of water. That way we're gonna be able to hopefully vary our intensity. Some of these clover blossoms are still a little damp, so I need to be a little more careful about where I rest my hand. For some reason, I really love clover. They just are such a tenacious little plant and little flower. I see them peeking up through sidewalk cracks, growing along the edges of ditches, growing in patches of gravel. Like they'll really just take any situation and make it work for them. I feel the same way about dandelions. I really love all these little spring flowers that aren't particularly showy, but they deal with some really terrible conditions in order to succeed and to thrive. And they're not really the sort of plants that people go out of their way to cultivate. So they kind of exist within our landscaping and our concrete structures by their own volition. I just really like that. And bees seem to love clover. So I'm just kind of doing a basic fill on all of our clover leaves. And right now, they're pretty much the same saturation as the green background fill we did. I'm not really concerned about that. I'm going to develop them a bit more in the course of this painting. At MTAC this year, I got one of the nicest compliments I've gotten in a while. A girl said that my art just gave her this really peaceful feeling, and she wasn't really sure why, but just everything on my table made her feel peaceful. I'd never really thought about it that way before, but that is really what I'm kind of striving for. I really like painting pretty peaceful things, kind of quiet, idyllic moments, which I know is not like the coolest thing to paint, but it makes me feel comforted doing it and comforted looking at it. And I know there are people out there who also enjoy such things. Even if we're kind of in the minority, that's all right. I mean, some people will do like pretty and sexy things, which I can appreciate, or pretty and cool things, or pretty and tough things, or tough and sexy, or tough and cool, you know, whatever. Any other variations, and I just try to aim for pretty and peaceful. I just want people to feel calm when looking at my things, and I often, like, you know, art teachers will be like, paint your emotions, and I really try not to do that, because I'd rather write my emotions than paint or draw my emotions. But I really enjoy using art and watercolor to, you know, kind of calm myself down, or to soothe myself, or just to make something that like feeds the soul or feeds the heart, even if it's not complicated. So I just really liked that compliment, because it was like somebody kind of saw what I was trying to do. So I'm gonna let those Clover dry, and then I think I'm gonna start on the bee, just try to get like a base layer of color on everything. Now that this is dried, I wanna start on the bee. Unfortunately, my reference is MIA, so what I'm gonna do instead is I'm gonna work a little bit on the Clovers until I can resurrect my reference. So I'm working directly from the pan, and I'm leaving the centers kind of, well, not unpainted, but I'm leaving them at the first level of painting. I'm a little disappointed that I can't find these fans. I'll have to keep looking, because I've actually really enjoyed painting these 3 fans. And I have all sorts of fun designs that would be fun to paint. But only having 3, I opted for kind of safe imagery, flowers, springtime scenes. Now down here at the bottom, I'm actually going to go ahead and fill them in almost all the way, because I have 2 other darker greens that I can use to kind of shade these. And I might actually do the same up here, or up back at the top, just to give a little more depth. Alright, so I'm going to let these dry, and then we'll get started on that bee. So now that this is dried, I'm going to go ahead and begin work on the honeybee. And for this, I'm going to want warm yellows, warm browns, and maybe even a black. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and select my colors from my Komorebi set. So I've grabbed brilliant yellow, yellow ochre, red ochre, and I think I'm also going to go for burnt sienna. And then for our black, I guess I'll grab an actual black. I was tempted to grab Payne's gray, but since everything has been drying so light on this paper, I probably can't really risk it. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm basically going to paint all of this little gal, brilliant yellow. Again, because this dries so faint. And then with a little bit of yellow ochre in the wings, because there's a little bit of gold to the wings, it looks like. And a little bit of red ochre here and here. And while that dries, I can actually develop the clover blossoms a little bit more. So I want a slightly darker ultramarine. And I'm basically just hitting kind of the low lights on the blossom. And since we're doing white clover, the goal is really just to indicate shadow. The goal isn't to cover the whole blossom. And I'll let those dry. All right, since the first layer on the bee is mostly dry, I'm gonna mix a little yellow ochre and a little red ochre together. Go ahead and outline the wings. Move those out of the way. And grab some darker green and start adding some detail back into our clover. I'm going to start with the ones in the background first and then add detail to the ones in the foreground after the background has dried a bit. All right, so I've got kind of a base layer on. I actually want to switch over to a synthetic brush. So I'm having a little bit of difficulty controlling the squirrel hair. If you're someone who notices you might have fine motor problems, like shaking hands, squirrel hair brushes are very, very soft, but that makes them very difficult to control. So you may find a synthetic is a bit easier to paint with. Now that that's dried, I'm going to start sketching in the stalks for the clover blossoms and the clover leaves. Again, working from left to right. And I'm leaving little gaps where they cross over. I feel like that's going to help create kind of a cleaner visual. And then, while that dries, I can work on my little bee friend a bit more. Try to stay out of my past me's way. And this is when being able to use a synthetic is really helpful. So, it's finally time to paint the sky background in, and I think I might want this to be the darkest ultramarine that I've painted so far as a sky. So I'm going to mix a lot of ultramarine in with my water. And then using the same techniques that I used on the other two fans, the cherry blossom and the plum blossom, start by working left to right, sort of sketching the sky in. And kind of leaving a border just so that there isn't like an inordinate amount of bleeding going on. And it's not going to be a precise border. It's going to be times when it touches and times when it doesn't. And I feel like of all three of my fan videos, this one is the most anybody can do it. I say this because all the shapes in this are really easy. Most people have seen Clover, so it's kind of an easy mental imagery. And I mean, I was sick painting this, so my hands were shaking really bad. So basically, you could even lack sort of the fine motor skills that most artists develop over time and still be able to do a pretty decent job. So I feel like this is kind of a good beginner project, especially if you're like an art teacher teaching middle grade or high school. A lot of those kids enjoy things that not only look good but are kind of functional. I've got my hand in the bee. So this could be a really easy watercolor project. Although that said, the Komorebis were kind of my friend in this. I don't know whether or not you could achieve anything similar with cheaper watercolors. It's not on this paper. But honestly, you could even, if you can't find these fans, you could cut out this sort of fan shape out of watercolor paper and then attach it to a handle or like a popsicle stick. I know, it sounds kind of janky, but it would have a similar effect and it would certainly have the same function. It would work as a fan. And that might be even easier for your students to paint on. Of course, kind of the problem with any watercolor project in a classroom setting, especially a classroom setting where the classes are like 50 minutes long, is that you have dry times. So even a fairly uninvolved watercolor project like this, where we're only really doing a few layers, might not be that feasible. But it would be good for like a standalone workshop where you might have like a 3-hour block, I would say. You guys noticed I painted the blue into the initial layer of grass green that we did. Now I need to let this dry. So I want to make the sky a little bit darker. And I think I want it to be darker at the top and get lighter at the bottom. So I'm mixing up a more intense ultramarine. This may not be intense enough. We'll see. And I want to use it to help make the white blossoms pop a little bit better. Because right now, kind of blend in with the sky. All right, I think that's going to be dark enough for that. And I think I'm going to want to darken some of the greens at the bottom as well. So I'm going to mix that a little darker, a little more saturated. Then I may go in and tighten up some of the green stalks since they are going to get a little bit lost by me doing this. And then I'll let that dry. So now that this is dried, I'm gonna go in and just do a few darker accents using more concentrated ultramarine. right, so now that that prior layer has dried, I'm gonna go in and hopefully I can be really light-handed about it. And I'm just going to tighten in a few of the details on the white clover, just because it's sort of getting lost. And I'm using a mixture of ultramarine to do that. I'm gonna let that dry, and then I'm gonna add a few white highlights and then use the fine text to add some shimmer. All right, guys, we're gonna add some white details with bleed proof white. Then I'm going to go back in with the green and just tighten up some of the stalks. All right, mes amis. Next up are the glimmering, shimmering, pearlescent fine tech watercolors. And then have a lovely sort of shamrocky green. So I'll start with this. And I'm basically doing what I did for the other fans. I'm just adding enough shimmer that if someone actually decided to use it, it would be kind of visually rewarding. So I'm not using it to cover the whole of the form. I'm just using it here and there as an accent. Then I'm going to use just a little bit of Inca Gold on the bee. And a little bit of the white on the clover. Do a little bit on the wing as well. And then a little bitty bit of this sort of chartreusey color. All right, I always say, I think I'm about done. And then I'm like, oh wait. And I decide to just do a little bit more. So I'm gonna add just a little bit of shimmer to some of the stalks, just to kind of keep the visual interest moving throughout the fan. All right, I think I'm about done. All right, art nerds, I think we are just about done with the final fan. I really like the bee. The bee's a really cute touch. I feel like I kind of made an arc, although not in that order. We did cherry blossoms, which are both a Japanese thing and, you know, this is for the Nashville Cherry Blossom Festival. We did plum blossoms, which are definitely more of a Japanese motif than an American motif. And then we did clover, which, while it might be kind of a universal motif, it has kind of deep personal resonance for me as an artist. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope it was helpful or inspirational to you guys. I hope this will give you the courage to maybe try picking up an unusual material to paint on, or creating a piece of art on an unusual material, maybe something utilitarian for everyday use so that you can have a little bit of art in your everyday. If you're looking for more watercolor tutorials, check out the rest of my channel and check out my blog at natosoup.blogspot.com. I have a watercolor basics series that's designed to get you painting. And if you enjoy my watercolor art, why not check out my watercolor comic at 7inchkara.tumblr.com or 7inchkara.com. This video was brought to you thanks to the generosity of my art nerds on Patreon. Thank you guys so much for your support and encouragement. I really, truly, sincerely appreciate it. I hope you guys have a great day, and I hope to see you again really soon. Bye!